He stood at just 5 feet 7 inches. Most thought he didn't even belong in the heavyweight division. But Tommy Burns didn't care. He was fast, strong, and fearless. He carried his fists and his title around the world, fighting in America, England, France, Ireland, Australia, anywhere they would let him in the ring. He broke records, made history, and took on challengers others wouldn't dare face. Some saw him as an underdog, but to the people who watched him fight, he was a lion in the body of a smaller man. This is Tommy Burns. He was the 12th child in a family of 13, and his family didn't have much at all. They moved from one small town to another, always trying to find a better life. But for Noah, childhood wasn't easy. 5 of his brothers and sisters didn't live long enough to grow up. Noah was a quiet boy with quick hands and a faster mind. Even though life seemed to throw him more hard days than good ones, he found joy in sports. He loved moving, running, playing, anything that made him feel alive. When he was just a teenager, he found himself in Detroit, Michigan, stepping into the world of prize fighting in the year 1900. By June 1903, he was hiding under a fake name, playing lacrosse for a Detroit team in Chatham, Ontario. He wasn't just avoiding attention. He was chasing his own dream in his own way. This was Noah's life, always moving, always finding a way forward, no matter how small the steps. In 1904, Noah Brusso decided to give himself a new name. He wanted something that sounded strong and bold, so he called himself Tommy Burns. At just 5 feet 7 inches tall, he was much smaller than most heavyweights, but Tommy never saw size as a reason to stop dreaming. At around 175 pounds, he stepped into the ring with the biggest men in the world and believed he could beat them. On February 23, 1906, in Los Angeles, Tommy faced Marvin Hart for the heavyweight championship of the world. Almost everyone thought he would lose. The bets were against him, and people said he wouldn't last 10 rounds. But Tommy kept fighting, round after round, until the very end. When the fight was over, the judges raised his hand. He had won. Tommy didn't just win the title. He defended it again and again, 11 times in less than 3 years. He didn't stay in one place either. He traveled across the world, taking on champions from England, Ireland, France, and Australia. In 1908, in Paris, he fought Joseph G. Smith, becoming the first heavyweight champion believed to face a Jewish challenger. One night, Tommy even fought twice and won both matches. Some said those fights didn't count, but the newspapers called them championship bouts. If you include them, Tommy defended his title 13 times. Tommy Burns was proof that the smallest man in the ring could still stand the tallest when the fight was over. In December 1908, after months of stalling, Tommy finally agreed to fight Jack Johnson. No one had ever seen a heavyweight championship match between a white champion and an African-American challenger before. This was history, and Tommy was right in the middle of it. But this was not just another fight for Tommy. He had asked for a big payday before stepping into the ring. An Australian promoter, Hugh D. McIntosh, gave him $30,000, an enormous sum back then. Johnson would get $5,000. By the time the fight came, Tommy was not at his best. People whispered that he had jaundice or the flu. He was lighter than usual, 168 pounds compared to Johnson's strong 192, and the difference showed. From the first bell, Johnson's punches came like heavy waves, and Tommy struggled to land anything solid. For 14 long rounds, the two battled under the hot Sydney sun. Tommy's face began to swell from Johnson's sharp uppercuts. The crowd gasped with every blow, and some feared he had broken his jaw. Before the 15th round could start, the police stepped in and stopped the fight. The referee awarded the victory and the world title to Jack Johnson. Tommy had lost his crown that day, but his place in boxing history was already secure. He was the man who proved that size was never the only thing that made a champion, and he was never afraid to face the biggest challenges, no matter how hard they hit. Years later, in a filmed interview, Tommy was asked about Jack Johnson. Without hesitation, he ranked Johnson as the second best boxer he had ever seen, putting James J. Jeffries at the top. Ironically, Johnson would later beat Jeffries in 1910, even though Jeffries had been retired for 6 years. Many claimed Jeffries was out of shape, but Tommy knew the truth. Time changes every fighter, no matter how great. In 1909, in Vancouver, Jack Johnson stood before a crowd and spoke about Tommy. He told them that Tommy was the only white heavyweight who had ever given a black man a fair shot at the world title. Coming from the man who took his championship, it was a rare and powerful compliment. Even after losing the crown, Tommy couldn't quite walk away from the ring. Boxing was in his blood. When the Great War broke out, he joined the Canadian Army, serving as a fitness instructor to keep soldiers strong and ready. But the itch to compete never left him. In 1920, just a month after turning 39, Tommy stepped back in the spotlight to face British champion Joe Beckett. Age had slowed him, and after 2 heavy knockdowns, his corner threw in the towel in the 7th round. Tommy's last fight ended with silence instead of cheers, but he had already written his story in the history of boxing, one of courage, daring, and the heart to face anyone. When Tommy finally stepped away from the ring, he couldn't leave boxing completely behind. For a while, he promoted fight shows, still feeling the pull of the sport that had made him famous. In 1928, he moved to New York City and ran a speakeasy during the roaring days of Prohibition. Life seemed good. He had money, memories, and stories to last a lifetime. But then came the Wall Street crash of 1929. The Great Depression followed, and like so many others, Tommy lost almost everything. The champion who once fought for the world's biggest prizes now worked regular jobs, selling insurance, guarding buildings, doing whatever he could to get by. Years later, in 1948, Tommy found a new calling. He became a minister, spending his days speaking about faith instead of fighting. By the time he was in his 70s, he was an evangelist living quietly in Coalinga, California. In 1955, while visiting a church friend in Vancouver, British Columbia, Tommy's heart gave out. He was 73. Only 4 people attended his burial at Ocean View Cemetery in Burnaby, and he was laid to rest in an unmarked grave. It wasn't until 1961 that a Vancouver sports writer raised the money for a proper memorial plaque. It now marks the resting place of the small man who once stood tallest in the boxing world, Tommy Burns. Today, most people remember Tommy Burns as the man Jack Johnson beat to become the first black heavyweight champion. But there was so much more to him than that. Tommy was the first true world-traveling champion, defending his title not just in America, but also in England, Ireland, France, and Australia. In 1907, when he fought Gunnar Moyer in London, it became the first world heavyweight championship fight of the gloved era ever held outside the United States. At just 5 feet 7 inches, Tommy was the shortest heavyweight champion in history. He wasn't the lightest. That title belonged to Bob Fitzsimmons. But when he lost to Johnson, he weighed only 168.5 pounds. Most of the time during his reign, he fought between 170 and 180 pounds. His long arms gave him a reach of 74 inches, even longer than Mike Tyson's. Tommy had power too. He won 8 straight title defenses by knockout or stoppage, a record that only Larry Holmes has matched. He was also the first heavyweight champion to win the title on points. Johnson may have handed him his first stoppage loss, but Tommy never lost inside the distance again until his very last fight at the age of 39. His reign lasted 2 years, 10 months, and 3 days, still one of the longest in heavyweight history. He defended his title 11 times, more than most champions ever manage. It's true that not every challenger was world-class. Sometimes, while traveling the globe, he'd fight the best local heavyweight he could find. In his very first title defense, he knocked out James J. Walker in the first round. Walker's record was only 1 win and 5 losses, with most of those defeats by knockout. Still, no one can take away the fact that Tommy Burns was a champion who carried his title across oceans, fought in front of crowds on 4 continents, and left his mark in the history of boxing forever. One of Tommy's most famous rivalries was with Bill Squires, the Australian heavyweight champion. Before their first fight, the odds were actually in Squires' favor, 10-9 that he would beat Tommy. But when the bell rang, It took only one round for Tommy to prove the odds wrong. He knocked Squires out and kept his title. Strangely, Squires still got 2 more chances at the championship, even though he lost 2 of his next 3 fights. But their trilogy of matches became something no other pair of boxers has ever done. They fought for the world title 3 times, each on a different continent: America, Europe, and Australia. Tommy's best win as champion came against Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, a former light heavyweight champion who had once beaten the legendary Bob Fitzsimmons. In a tough 20-round battle, Tommy came out on top, winning on points. Old film of his 1907 defense against Bill Lang shows what kind of fighter Tommy really was. He was an aggressive counterpuncher, quick to strike back, strong up close, and ruthless when he saw his chance to finish a fight. Today, Canada has had other heavyweight champions like Trevor Berbick and Bermain Stivern, but they were born in Jamaica and Haiti. Tommy Burns still holds a unique place in history. He remains the only Canadian-born man ever to win the World Heavyweight Championship. Years after Tommy had hung up his gloves, his name still carried weight in the boxing world. An Australian welterweight champion named Jeffrey Mostyn Murphy even chose to fight under the name Tommy Burns as a tribute to the Canadian champion he admired. Tommy's legacy only grew after his passing. His achievements were recognized by some of the most respected sporting institutions. He was inducted into the Canadian Boxing Hall of Fame, the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame in 1955, the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1996, and finally, the Ontario Sport Hall of Fame in 2012. For a man who stood shorter than most of his opponents, Tommy Burns' place in history stands tall. His name is remembered not just for the titles he won, but for the way he carried them around the world, into history books, and into the hearts of those who still tell his story.